second of three parts in the squat technique is the descent or the way down. So first part is the setup, second part is the descent. Again, these rules on the descent are general, but they mostly apply across the board. After you've taken the bar out and gotten your walkout done, you're ready to squat. This is when you take your final breath and your final brace. Make sure that you get that 360 degrees IAP, intra-abdominal pressure, push out against the belt. That's the last thing you're gonna do before you start to come down with the bar. Once you get that breath, you're gonna make sure your lats are tight. You're gonna do that by pulling against the bar and doing that anti-shrug. You want to maintain most of your weight between your heel and the balls of your feet. You don't want too much weight out on your toes, or else you may have a tendency to tip forward. You need some weight at your toes for balance, but the majority of the weight is gonna be distributed between your heel and the balls of your feet. What happens next is extremely important to pay attention to. What happens next is where most athletes miss the lift. Even if you attribute missing the lift on the way up, what happens next is most likely the reason why you miss a lift. So it's extra important to pick up on these next cues. To initiate the descent, you've got your breath, you've got your brace, your lats are tight. You initiate with the lifter's wedge or the hip hinge. So that means you push your hips back slightly. Now what can't happen is for that bar to come back horizontally as well. So what you're doing is you're braking at the hips, keeping your spine neutral, hips slide back a little bit, knees come out a little bit, and allow them to travel forward just a hair. So it's a nice balance between bringing the hips back, opening the knees out, letting the knees slide forward a little bit. And now the biggest cue, you descend like that, keeping the bar, if you're looking at the bar on the side, that bar should look like it's in a Smith machine, traveling vertically straight down. Hold that air tight, push out against that belt the entire time. That bar is traveling straight down, and in your head, you're visualizing your entire body as a spring. The more you compress that, the more you get down, the further you get down, you're compressing a spring, you're winding it up tight, and you're creating that tension you need to explode on the way up. Once you get to your bottom position where you're just above parallel, that spring is almost at maximal contraction, and you're gonna hit a dip. The dip is very, very tough to master. The big key with the dip, it does not mean getting loose. All the dip means is you're accelerating a tiny bit at that very end, and you're accelerating so you can harness the stretch reflex that's contained in your muscles to jump back up. So if I was to flick my hand or my finger like this, there wouldn't be nearly as much force on it as if I pulled back and flung it like that. That's what we're doing with the dip. We want to accelerate down, increase the tension in those muscles, and then release. So you're gonna have a lot more tension and a lot more force if you do something like that versus like that. And again, this whole time, maintaining that pressure, imagining that Smith machine type squat where the bar is going straight down. As you get to the bottom, if you have either mobility problems or flexibility problems, or you have trouble getting into the bottom position, one key at the very end is to continue opening the knees just a little bit, and that will give your hips the room to get that final few inches and get below parallel. The three most common mistakes in the descent are as follows. The first is I see too much forward knee travel that's associated with the initial descent of the squat. So the number one cue with initiating the descent is braking at the hips and not pushing the knees forward. The knees need to have some minor forward knee travel, but it needs to be natural and not forced. So you're not initiating the squat by pushing the knees forward like this. You're braking at the hips and allowing the knees some natural forward movement. The second mistake, I see too much weight shifting forward on the foot. If you don't have very much weight on the heel and most of the weight is distributed between the ball of your foot and the toe, you're gonna have a lot of weight forward on you. And as you go down, that's gonna get exaggerated. And instead of the bar being on a Smith machine, that forward weight on your foot is gonna force that bar to slide forward. And now when you start to come up, the bar is way forward in front of your center of gravity and you're not in the ideal position to launch it back up. So anytime you squat, you have to translate that force from the ground through your body to the bar to lift it, correct? So if you have the weight on the ball of your foot and the toe, you need to translate that force through your foot back to your heel and up the body. The only way you can translate force from the floor back up, at some point it needs to come back through your heel and your ankle. So the more focus and more weight you can maintain through your heel and your ankle is going to be less wasted movement, wasted motion, wasted effort, translating that force from the front of your foot to the back. The third mistake I see is when people try to hit the dip at the bottom they either get loose or they allow themselves to round and get hunched over. It's not that at all. The dip isn't a loss of tightness. It's not a lack of position. It's not losing position. All it is an acceleration of the same movement pattern to the bottom of the squat, accelerating to create faster tension in the muscles to spring back up. And that covers the descent portion of the squat technique.